All right, I'm going to introduce Ginnie Lodge, our very own Ginnie Lodge. Ginny has been a BPS member now for several years. She enjoys most types of photography and is always up for trying something new. She is constantly learning from the amazing members of this group and the stellar speakers we have had the privilege to hear from. Over the past decade, Ginny has had her photos accepted into a variety of juried shows, including Transformations and Odyssey, organized by the Pennsylvania Center for Photography, Drawn from Nature at the John James Audubon Center, an international juried photo competition in Prairie Village, Kansas, and most recently this spring's Philadelphia Flower Show. Her photos have hung in the Visitor Center at Valley Forge, the Pennsylvania State Museum, and along the Schuylkill River Trail as part of the Art on the Trails initiative. Many of her photos have appeared in Pennsylvania Magazine, and she has also written a number of feature articles to go along with her photos. A new one is scheduled for the July-August issue. Tonight, she'll be sharing something she has fun with, experiments in compositing. Take it away, Ginny.
Woo! All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. First, I'm going to make you guys small. No, hold on. I have to make you big first. Share my screen. All right. You should be seeing experiments in with composites.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So first thing you might wonder is, what is a composite? So I thought I better sort of look that up and make sure I was talking about the right thing. And I found several different definitions. It's an image constructed of two or more photos. It's a digital image composed of elements of other images and photos, or a post-production creation in which elements from different photographs are edited together using photo editing software to create a new image. Now, by definition, this could be as simple as, adding a friend to a photograph when she couldn't attend. This is a group of my college friends, and one time my friend Linda just couldn't make it, and so we always stand in the same order here, but Linda wasn't there. So I decided I could go back to one of the previous times we were together and add Linda in. So I'm just going to open this up in Photoshop and see if I can add Linda back into the picture. So this is this really most basic thing that could be defined as a composite, simply adding somebody back into the picture. Now, of course, Linda stayed the same age and we all got a year older, but that's the way it goes sometimes. Now, this obviously is not really what I'm here to talk about today. I'm really here to share with you about the kind of composite that starts in the imagination. There are some mind-blowing composites out there. I'm talking about some really amazing things that you can see. And I am going to share tonight just some that aren't quite as complex, more as a starting point. I'm also going to share some mistakes that I have made and give you sort of the background or my thinking process of why I made certain decisions as I worked on each image. In each case, understanding Photoshop, knowing about selections, layers, and layer masks is what really makes a composite possible. Several years ago, a few years ago, my husband and I were out walking on a local trail, and we came across what must have been an old trash dump. What was left was a really interesting collection of old bottles, and we gathered up some of the more intriguing ones and took them home. And this one, based on the information that I could read on the lid, actually came from the Casco Distillery in Philadelphia. So I looked that up and found that distillery was in operation between 1943 and 1952. So once we got home, I cleaned up the bottle a little bit and I set it up on a log from a tree we had cut down in our backyard. And I draped a dark towel behind it, and I photographed it on my deck in the sunshine. And thinking, I think I could do something with this image. As I was fiddling with the bottle and thinking about how long it must have been in the ground, the old Jim Croce song, Time in a Bottle, kept running through my mind, and I started to get sort of an idea. So I composed a composite image using the bottle, and I actually used an image with timepieces or clocks and gears that I took at one of the first dynamic images conferences that was offered by BPS, and Mike Moats was talking about macro photography. So I had taken the picture of these watches. So let me go open this Photoshop document up over here in Photoshop, and I'll talk about kind of how I put this together. So, of course, here was the original image. And the first thing I decided when I looked at this was it was too bright in the background. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, if you're familiar with Photoshop, this layer above my background layer is an adjustment layer. And it's a curves layer because what I wanted to do was sort of darken up this background. So if you look at the layer carefully, you can see that it has the white is what's showing through, and that's the part that I wanted to sort of darken up in the background. And I painted it with black over the bottle so that that would not get darkened. Then I added in the watches. Now I added those in as a smart object, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but this was the original image of the watches. And then I took that and layered it in to the other. This is kind of in my way. How do I move that? There we go. So I layered that in to here. Now, this was my first mistake that I'm about to talk about, because if you look at this next layer, you'll see that what it says is merge visible. And what that does is it takes everything in the layers below that and puts it all together into a new layer. And as I turn this off and on, you can see that what I did once I merged was I got rid of some of the hot spots and a couple of little spots on the log. The problem with using merge visible in your layers is that you can now, no matter what you do down here, if you wanted to change something, you can't see that anymore because this layer is now covering up the other layers down below. I thought that there was way too much blue here because the towel was actually a dark blue and that had been reflected in the bottle. So I did another adjustment layer right here, hue and saturation adjustment, and just pulled down the blue tones in the image. This next layer, I kind of forget what I did here, but clearly I brightened things up a little bit. I may have made a copy of the layer and made it lighter. And this was another little slight adjustment to darken up this area right here. Now, in the next three layers, I was kind of playing around with what could I now put in this background. So I tried a texture that I had purchased somewhere, and I didn't really like the way that looked. And then I tried another sort of rocky texture, and I'm pretty sure this is the one I ended up with. This was a picture I took of a stone wall of a local barn, and I just layered that in behind. And you can see again, if you look at the layer mask, which we'll talk about when I go through my final image, that the white part is showing just what I wanted to show from behind the bottle. I think layer 7, I just went back in and took a few little things off that again were distracting me. And then my final layer was a gradient mask, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those later, but that just sort of tones the whole image a little bit. And I have that down at just a little, it's on a soft light blending mode here. You can see what the different blending modes would do to this. And just about, just a really low opacity. Maybe I had it at about 8%. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about blending modes later. This photograph actually entered in Pennsylvania Magazine. One year they had what they called an artistic expressions category. Now, this did not place in the contest, but it was in the magazine. Later, it was in the mailbox section. And I think the reason he was willing to put it in the mailbox section was because everything in it came from Pennsylvania. The log, the bottle from Philadelphia's, that distillery, the watches were taken at the conference in Reading, and the barn. And of course, the song Time in a Bottle, written by Jim Croce. He grew up in Upper Darby in Delaware County, not that far from where I grew up. So it was a total Pennsylvania photograph. Well, I really wasn't done with the bottles. I took another picture of a bottle in this angle, and I thought about what kind of a composition I could make, what kind of a composite could I do with this? Well, what do you put in a bottle? You put a ship. So I went ahead and decided I'm going to try to get a ship in my bottle. And when this shows up, this is just noticing that I made a change. I'm opening this from Lightroom into Photoshop just so that I can show you what I did over there. So let's sort of, step through some of the things I did here. Now, this time I was a little smarter. What I usually do when I open a photo in Photoshop, the first thing I usually do is make a copy of it. And that's so that I can make any changes that I want to make to the photo on the copy, not on the original. So that if I mess something up, my bottom layer is still just the way it was when I first came in. So I've made a copy, and on the copy, I kind of got rid of that one little spot there, a couple spots up here. And then I took a photograph that I had taken up in Maine of a sailboat and some rocks and this wave. And this was all in one photo. It was really convenient that that sailboat happened to be going by behind those rocks. And I decided to go ahead and add that in. This was clearly too bright, so I used an adjustment layer and darkened up the log. And then I darkened up some of the rest of the image so that the ship in the bottle would look a little bit more, would pop a little bit more from the page. Now, I went back to find these layers and realized that I must have done something to this in between here that I don't see, because this was what I ended up with on my final layer. And then later I actually revisited this, and let me just pop into that one real quick. I revisited this and I did a little bit more to it. So I started in this next one. I actually started with what I had already done. This was where I started. And I started to think, well, I could do something else to this. I might be able to, add a seagull. And so I put that seagull from Maine on there. And I thought, nah, he's too big. So I'm a smaller seagull. And if I'm going to have a seagull sitting here, and I see there's a lot of light coming down from the top, but there's no shadow under the seagull. So I'm going to add another blank layer here, and I'm just going to add a few shadows so that it looks more natural that the seagull would be standing there. And we'll talk about shadows again a little bit further on. And then I thought, well, I sort of want this to look a little bit more watery. So I created a sort of an overlay to give it sort of that watery look. I did not apply the watery overlay to the gull or the bottle. As you can see, they're black on the layer mask. And then, since I was having fun with it, I decided I might as well add something. This seemed a little empty right here, so why not pop in a moon? So I never really did anything with this image. It was just sort of to practice and play around with making composites, using layers, using masks, etc. I'll pause. Were there any questions at this point? If not, we'll move on, but.
Did you think about doing a message in a bottle?
I didn't. However, I did one time. We did one time find a bottle with a message in it on the beach. But you've given me another idea. I didn't try that. Okay, so let's move on. One of the favorite photos I ever have taken was this one of a robin in the snow. I named this "I'm Out of Here" because the robin had just returned to Pennsylvania in March, and then we had a snowstorm. And I really liked the image just the way it was, but you know, I started to get my imagination working again, and I had a grandson. My grandson at that point was a toddler, and I thought, you know, it'd be fun if he could ride on that robin. So I went back through pictures that I had taken of Henry, and I found this one, and he was riding on this playground toy, and I thought, you know, maybe I could use this picture and place him on the bird. Now, never one to run from a challenge. I just decided to plunge ahead and put Henry on the bird. I credit some of my trusted photo friends who are willing to look at this composition in its various stages and give me advice, as well as the internet, which I often would search to figure out how to do something. And one friend's suggestion, which I thought made a difference, when he looked at this, he said, you know, he's a little bit too far down on the robin, and if he were sitting on a robin and riding it, he would be leaning forward more, as one would do if you were riding on an animal. So I continued working on it, and I moved him around, and I moved him forward. And if you look at the difference between these two, this one absolutely looks like a more natural position for him to be in. So as I worked with this image, I began to really learn more about light and shadow and how those things really impact the image. So let me show that to you here. And you'll see this one has quite a few layers to it. So here's how we started. And this next group of layers, if you guys can see the layer panel right over here on the right. Can you see that, Jay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So you'll see here that I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers right here that are all in a group called Henry and Shadow. So if I turn that group on, now you can see Henry sitting here on the bird. And you might remember that he was holding on to this toy. He had his hand holding onto the handle here. So I thought, I've got to do something with that. So I guess I took a picture of a stick. I don't remember what I did with that stick, but every boy riding a robin should have a stick to wrangle it with. So I found a stick and placed him on here. Now, you'll notice that the light is coming really down here on his hair. It's really coming from over here. And so if that were the case, then there need to be shadows behind him on the bird. So I'm just going to zoom in here. And if you look over here in the list, here's Henry. And I have something here called hand shadow. So if you look right in here, if I turn that off and I turn it back on again, you'll see that you probably didn't even notice the shadow before, but without the shadow, it doesn't look accurate, doesn't look right. You put the shadow in there, there should be shadow on this side of him. Same thing is true with the stick. I have a shadow behind the stick to make the stick look more realistic in what it is. And there are some other shadows behind his legs and so forth, because you can see here, there's a shadow on the side from his ear. And also on his collar because of the way the light is coming. For the same reason, let me zoom up here a little bit. You'll see I added a little bit of light to the bird's head. I had already turned that on. And when this bird was actually in the snow, the bird was casting a shadow on the snow, but I realized that there was no shadow for Henry. So I went in to a blank layer and used a very soft brush and just sort of added a very muted shadow here on the snow to reflect Henry. I tried adding some, oh, sorry, I don't mean to use the brush tool. I tried adding some snow. I sort of looked up, how to get a snow overlay. And I tried a couple different types of snow overlays. And then I wasn't really happy with any of them. And I decided to figure out how I could make my own snow. And so, of course, back to the internet, how do you make snow in a picture? And it's a more complicated process than I have time to explain, but you actually create a layer and you add noise to the layer, and then you do some blurring, and then you change it around, and I kind of forget exactly how it works. But anyway, this layer right here added just a nice little amount of small snow. And then on top of that, I added some bigger snow so that it would really look like he was out in the storm. Now, what I could do here is I could add a layer mask to this layer, and I could paint on it in black. And this is in my way again. Yeah, it's a nice sort of a low flow there. So I'm going to paint in black and just sort of make it so that not all the snow is showing on his face, if you didn't want his face to have a lot of snow on it. And I think I did that too much. So you go back with white and just put a little bit of snow back. Okay, I think I've explained all the layers here. So that's Henry and the Robin. All right, let's go back here. Now, after Henry, he had been featured in a composite. And when I had a granddaughter, I began to imagine, what could she do? So I sort of envisioned her flying through the air. This is Edith Clare, and I had in my mind that she could be flying somehow. So now I kind of had to get the pieces. I wanted her to stand out against a blue sky. So I had her wear orange, which is a contrasting color to blue. And I took quite a few photos of her in various positions. In this one, she's holding the teddy bear that I got when I was a girl. So that makes it, meaningful to me. I knew that her feet had to not be flat. So I had her stand on a bench, and I had her mom hold her hand and sort of pull her up. Because I knew I wanted her to be hanging onto something and flying, and I didn't want her feet to be flat. I wanted them to sort of be dangling. I also didn't want to have to worry about cloning out grass on her shoes. So I just had her stand on this little bench in the backyard. Now, she put up with this for a while. I had her on the bench, I had her on a rock. And after some time, she just showed us that she was pretty much done with it and had had enough. And that was when I stopped. Of course, I photographed some milkweed seeds, and I had a picture of this nice blue sky. And so that's sort of where I started. I started with the blue sky and opened that up in Photoshop. And then I began adding my elements. So I took my sky, I added in the milkweed. I knew I wanted her sort of in this open area, so I put the milkweed up there. I added Edith, and you can see how I used her hand position so that she could hold on to the milkweed seed the same way she had been holding on to her mom's hand. I zoomed in to get all that right, and I used some masking and so forth there. Noticed that her little flower was a little bit too bright there on her headband, so I went in and just did a special layer to darken that. I added another seed over there on the left. And if you look at my layers panel here, you'll see that the different layers that do anything are named. And that's a super important thing to do, especially when you have a lot of layers. Giving your layers names and sometimes grouping them really helps you when you go back to try to make a change in something. Now, there's a couple of layers here that I was playing around with certain things, and I ended up not really using those layers, so that's why they're turned off. But sometimes I just leave the layers in there until I'm all done, just to see what I'm actually going to be able to use. So I kind of liked this, but it looked like Edith was way up in the sky and it looked a little dangerous and sort of flying up there above nothing. So I went back through my photos and I found one I had taken down at Shenandoah National Park of the Blue Ridge Mountains. And I thought, well, that'd be nice to have some mountains down below her. I took this and just basically did a selection and copy and pasted that selection right in here. I liked the way the mountains were going off in the distance. She needed another seed in the sky, so I added one down here. I think if I were to do this again, I would photograph a lot more milkweed seeds and put them around in other places. The next thing would be this, again, like I used with the time in a bottle, I'm going to add a gradient map. And again, I'll explain that when we get to the last one. But this sort of helps to even out the tones. And then I added one more here to sort of give it just that everything kind of looked like it belonged together. If I turn these off, you'll see the difference between that and that. And then finally, I sort of felt like these mountains down here sort of needed some clouds in front of them. So I put a blank layer and then I got a cloudy brush, which I think I might have made out of my own cloud. I taught something about how to make your own brushes. And I just painted these wispy clouds on the blank layer and added some wispy clouds to the foreground to sort of pull the whole thing together. And so I call this one Unperturbed because I feel like Edith is just dangling there and she doesn't really care. Although, as you saw, she did kind of get to the point where she'd had enough of that. Let me get my notes here and move to my next image. One morning in November, I looked out and I had this old piece of bark sitting on my deck, and I used it sometimes to put seeds on for the birds because it made a nice perch for bird photographs. But there was this just gorgeous, beautiful frost that had formed all along the edge of the bark. And I decided that, I really needed to grab my camera and go out and photograph it. I knew I'd be able to use it for something. The sun was just coming up and it was shining through this frost. And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, well, that really looks like a landscape kind of fading off into the distance. Why not put my grandchildren in the scene? So I photographed them walking just down the walk in front of their house. And I took a lot of photographs of them doing that because I like to have a lot to work with when I get back to the computer. And when people are walking together and you're snapping pictures, you never know what position they're going to be in. You don't know how their feet are going to be. And so I took a lot of pictures. And when I went through them all, this is the one I liked because they both had their right foot up. I liked the position they were in. I liked that you could see between his legs and her legs, and they weren't like mushed together. And so I selected this one. So let me go back in. Here we go. So I'm going to open this one up over in Photoshop, and we'll look at the layers on this one. Okay. So again, I brought in this original layer. And first thing I did, make a copy of the layer. It turns out I didn't end up doing anything with this copy, but I did that first. And I realized that this area back in here, I mean, it looked beautiful with the sun coming up, but there really wasn't, you couldn't really see the sun because there's trees back there. So I grabbed a sunrise picture that I had from somewhere else and added that sun in to this image using a mask. If you were to, let's see here, if I turn these off and I turn off, yeah, well, you can see how this was here. If I turn off the mask, this is actually what I brought in. Then I used the mask to mask it around the tops of the, well, what I think looked like mountains, but you know, it was just frost. Then I dropped Henry and Edith into the picture. And when I put them in here, I made them a smart object. And a smart object is something that is really a good idea to use when you're making a composite, because it allows you to make changes to this object without degrading the image. You can scale it, rotate it, skew it, change it, and the original image data is still there. So right over here is H&E, that's Henry and Edith. And if I double click on that, it will show you the original picture. And this is where I had selected them. And you can see, I didn't even make that great of a selection, but I used a mask later to get rid of this extra stuff. Oh, let's undo that. So once you have them in here as the smart object, you'll see this is a layer mask right here. If I turn this off, you can see all those little bits that are there, which I painted out with a black brush because that was what I was doing at that point. I also added a couple of effects, and I think you can see this best. I guess what happened was I saw that they were walking along here and that the sun was here. So they should sort of have a bit of a rim light around them. I had no idea how to do that. So I looked it up, got an idea, got some suggestions about using an effect called an inner glow. And I think you can see it best if I zoom in here. And if you look at his jeans and I turn that effect off, and then I turn it back on again, hopefully you can see the difference. It's very subtle, but there's a little glow around the edge of them that wasn't there before, and it makes them look like they belong in this spot. The other thing I did was I added a filter here that desaturated, because this is the saturation that they were when I took the picture. And so I added this filter that I was able to just pull that saturation down so that they look a lot more like they belong in this particular scene. And finally, I actually put on, again, a gradient map to blend everything together. And this map, this layer is also a soft light, and I'm going to even bring that down a little bit more, just enough. So if you turn that off and on, you can see it kind of warms up this layer right here. The last thing I would probably do with this, if I were, if this is the first time I was working on it, I would take this, I would save this, it would go back over into Photoshop. I'm sorry, it would go back over into Lightroom. And then I would probably end up cropping this. I don't really like this most foreground piece right here. So I actually got this printed on metal. It looked great. And I would pretty sure I cropped it something like that, something along those lines. And that worked out pretty well. I kind of like the way that worked. Okay, I'm going to, does anybody have any questions at this point?
I think you'll have a collection of photos to hide away and share with your grandchildren when they're older.
Yeah. I printed out a couple of these. They each have one of these in their bedroom. Edith has the milkweed one and Henry has the robin one printed on a little canvas mini in their bedrooms.
Question.
Yes.
Is it possible to make that a starburst kind of sun?
I don't know if you could do that after the fact or not. I've never tried that.
It
That's
might
that's
add a bit of a twinkle to it, you know?
Yep,
thinking.
that's it could happen. Okay, so
there's lots of Photoshop tutorials on doing starbursts.
exactly, yeah, that's true. Okay. All right, so finally, I actually want to go through the steps it took to create this image. And I will be actually stepping through this so that you can see exactly how I go about it. So I had an amazing mushroom in my front yard last year. I watched it change over a series of days, and it was almost hard to believe that it was the same mushroom. I actually made a little collage. This is the mushroom. This is how it started. And over a series of days, it changed like this. And it was all the same mushroom. You can tell because it had this really interesting little hole in it. From September 4th to 7th, that's how the mushroom changed. And I went out and photographed it every day. In fact, at one point, I needed to mow the lawn and I didn't want to damage it. So I put it under a canning jar so that I could get the lawn mowed and not damage my little mushroom. Well, in any case, the mushroom really seemed like it needed to, it was a perfect place for a little gnome or a little elf to sit underneath, but I didn't have one of those. So what else? I decided I was going to put Edith under the mushroom, and she was coming over to our house. So I sat her in the backyard and I had her put her back up against the pole for the wash line. Yes, we do have a wash line. I still hang my wash out to dry. And I took a lot of pictures of her leaning up against the pole, so that I had a lot to choose from when I returned to my computer. And I finally selected the one I was going to use. And I picked this one because her hand was up out of the grass. She was looking at me. She was making kind of a funny smile, but oh well. And I thought I might be able to use this image. So let me step through exactly what I did. So I started off with my image, just this mushroom in Lightroom, and I opened that image in Photoshop. So let's do that. Okay, so here we are in Photoshop. Oopsie, that's not what I meant to do. Excuse me. There we go. So here we are in Photoshop, and I have my background. Now, first thing I'm going to do, I am going to Control J and make another layer. Always making a copy. Control J will very quickly make a copy of your background layer, and I'm going to name it. I'll just name it mushroom. Okay. So when I look at this, the first thing I notice about it is that there are some distracting problems with it. For example, what is this thing? We've got a little problem here. So I'm going to actually take my Band-Aid, my spot healing brush, and just see if I can get rid of a couple of these little things that are bothering me that will not look good in the final picture. I'm going to go down here. I remember there was something down here. Get rid of those. And this is really too bright, so I'm going to actually use my clone tool and try to sort of, that's a nice, fairly low flow, to kind of minimize this bright spot here. There we go. All right. And there's another one up here. So this is not going to show much once we're all the way done, but okay. The other problem for me is this really bright blade of grass over here. So it's really hard to do this while people are watching you because, you know, you're probably going to not do it right, but we're going to see what we can do to kind of minimize this grass. And again, you'll see once we get done here, it's I like that copy there. All right, and I also really, really don't like this brown one down here. So we'll just see if we can kind of minimize that a little bit. All right, that'll do for now. Well, except for this over here. So, all right, very good. All right, so there we go. So mushroom, and I'm going to rename this right here, remove distractions. All right, there we go. Now, I feel like this is entirely too strong, too saturated. And so I'm going to do an adjustment layer, a hue and saturation adjustment layer. You can pick that from up here, or you can click on this little one down here and do hue and saturation. And I'm just going to do in the master, the default overall saturation. I'm just going to pull that down a little bit so this becomes a little bit more like what I was going for this kind of dreamy look I want. The other thing I want to do here is I happen to know that the light is actually coming from over here, but there's a bright corner over here because the house is sort of shade and a tree is sort of shading the mushroom, but you can see there is light here and here. There's light coming from here. So I wanted to actually add some light over in this corner. To do that, I'm going to select my rectangular marquee tool. And I'm going to copy this corner. So I'm going to do Control C, Control V, and you'll see that this actually made a new layer. I'm going to call this corner light. Oh, what did I just do? Made a new layer. Okay, let's just undo that because I did the wrong thing. Sorry. Okay. There we go. Let's try copying that again. Why is it doing that? What am I? Oh, I know. I have to do it down here. Sorry. I was on
the wrong layer.
I was on the hue and saturation. I was on the adjustment layer. Yes, thank you. All right. I'm going to take that and put it over here. Yes, I was thinking, what in the world am I doing? This is what happens when you try to do this live. I'm going to put that over here. I'm going to transform that, which you could do Control T, but I'm just going to flip that horizontally. And I'm going to grab that and really sort of stretch it out a little bit. Maybe not that much. And now I'm going to add a layer mask. And I'm going to get a nice big old soft black brush and kind of get rid of these edges and sort of give it that little bit of, and reduce the opacity of the layer so that it's a little bit more of a subtle light coming in there. All right, that'll do for now. Now I'm ready to add my subject, my little gnome. So I'll just go ahead and open, I'll just open up Edith wherever she is. Where is she? Right here. And And I'm going to use select subject, which is one of the great selection tools, similar to the one in Lightroom, where you can select the subject. And Photoshop is great. It will find her and do a fairly good job of selecting her. Now, what I want to do is I want to see how that is and kind of refine that a little bit. So I'm going to go up to select and go to this select and mask, which is Alt Control R on a PC. And I can view it on black. I can view it on like an onion skin to sort of see what's behind her. I can view it with an overlay. I kind of like viewing it on black because I can see how well it selected her hair, and you can see it really did a great job of selecting these wispy little hairs over here. But I can see that it also grabbed a little bit of this right here. So I'm able to go in here to a brush tool, and I could either hold down Alt or Option on a Mac, or I could just click the minus up here and use my brush to go in and just get rid of this little bit of background that it grabbed that I didn't really want. I could do that here. I can do it. I could do it once I got her into the, I'm just going to take this bit off too, because this wasn't really doing anything. We'll deal with that piece of grass later. All right. All right, that looks pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and output that as a selection right now. So she's selected. At this point, everybody does, there are many ways of doing this, but what I do is once I make my selection, I just do a Control-C to copy that selection. And I'm going to go ahead and put her, Control-V, place her into this image. She's in here as a layer, and I'm going to convert this layer again to a smart object. That means I can do things to it. I can move her around and I can switch her. I can resize her, and it doesn't lose any of the data that is in there. So if I grab, I can resize her, move her around, and place her up against the mushroom. You can use your arrow keys to sort of nudge your selection to where you want it. And hit enter to commit to that location. So that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that's about how I want it. I might want to move her this way just. Again, this is not going to be perfect because I'm doing it live. At this point, if there was something that didn't, that I had still that wasn't good, I would I would add a layer mask here and be able to change that. But I do want to get rid of this piece of grass on her arm because that's not really matching the other grass here. So I can now open the smart object, and I can go in here with a spot healing brush, and I can use that to get rid of the grass on her arm. Oh, that was a mistake. Let's try not to go so far. Oh, that really did do something weird. I'm going to get rid of this little insect bite here. And I will deal with that when I get back over. So I'm going to save that. And now we have this little problem right here. So I'm just going to add a layer mask to this and use my black. Oh, okay, let's undo that. Add a layer mask. What in the world? Phew. Like I said. I need to raise my flow here. And I want to paint with black in this little spot. There we go. Close enough. All right. All right, she's placed where we want her. Now at this point, the light is coming in from over here. So obviously she's going to need a shadow behind her as well. When we didn't label this, we lost this label name here too. Let me call this corner light. And we call this Edith. Underneath Edith, we're going to need to make a blank layer. So, well, that'll be above corner light. If I just click on this add layer, you'll see that it's adding a layer that is blank. It's transparent. So we want to create a little bit of a shadow behind her on this blank layer. And to do that, we're going to use a brush, but we want the color of the shadow to match the color of these other shadows that are on the mushroom. So I'm going to double click on this color picker over here and move my eyedropper into the image to select the shade or the color of the shadow. I'm going to go a little one down here. And you can see what color that is right here. Now I'm going to go into the image. And because I'm under this smart object, which is her selection, when I paint, it's not going to go over her. It's only going to go behind her, but it will be on top of the mushroom. So I have a regular round brush, make it a little bit bigger and really soft. And I'm just going to go along her like that. Now I did sort of cover up that piece of grass, but actually that's okay. I might decide to pull the opacity on that down because you really just want it to be a subtle shadow, and then you can turn it off and on and see what difference it makes. Definitely needs to be brought, the opacity needs to be brought down a little bit more, and you just sort of play around with it until it looks right. And creates just enough so that she doesn't look like she's sitting there and not casting any shadow. Now, the next part is the biggest challenge. And actually, I entered this in a contest, and the person who was evaluating it said they didn't like the way I did the grass along the legs, and I completely agreed. What we have to do is somehow make this look more natural down here. And I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not going to get everything done on this that I need to do, but what I have to do is somehow reveal some of this grass and try to make it look real. So I'm going to be painting in black on this white layer mask. And I'm going to be trying to create some sort of grass, some sort of grass blades, that's what they're called, grass blades, coming up. And I played with this a long time on another version of this that I did. And yeah, like I said, I don't think I can make it look perfect, especially not while you're all watching me, because it makes me nervous. But I did do a pretty good job on it on one I was trying. while I was getting ready for this presentation. And basically what you want to do is make it so that this blends in. And again, I cannot do this while you guys are all watching, but it takes some time. You're going to use different sizes of your brush. You're going to adjust the size of your brush, and you want to get rid of any of the grass that came along with her so that you've got it looking real. And again, this is something you have to sort of work on and sculpt in a way. And eventually you can make it look better than what I just did right there. But we'll keep on going. Just pretend that I did a much better job on the grass right there. You would spend a lot more time on that. And there are a lot of, there's some different things you could do to try to make it look more real. Yeah. All right, I'm not going to overdo that at the moment. So that was, again, painting with black on this mask to sort of reveal some of the grass that was behind her. Okay, let me think here. Once I got that done, yes, I feel that actually this hue and saturation layer, I think was from way down there. There we go. Once I got done here, I realized I needed to pull that saturation down again. So again, I'm going to go ahead and get a hue and saturation adjustment layer because I'm looking for sort of a dreamy look. I'm not looking for something that looks realistic. And I'm going to pull that saturation down yet again, a little bit like maybe about there. In order to sort of blend everything together, I decided I was going to put a texture over this. And so I opened up, I think I'd do it from here. Going to open up just a texture layer, and I cannot really remember where I got this texture layer, if it's the picture I took or I probably got it somewhere. I really like to use everything I take myself, but in this particular situation, I saw this texture and I thought it might work. So in this situation, there are multiple ways of getting this image over onto that one. But again, I usually use Control-A to select the whole thing, Control-C to copy it, and I pop back over here. I want it above all these other layers. So I go to the top layer and I Control-V and paste it in. That's not quite big enough. So if I Control-T to get the transform tool and just pull it out so that it's covering here. So, boy, now you can't even see it, can you? Well, what I did was I just left it here as this layer, and I just pulled the opacity down to about 30%. And what that does then is it sort of blends everything together, and again is starting to add in kind of that dreamy, sort of in the woods dreamy look that I'm going for. And after I did that, I realized, you know what? I feel like it needs, it's got these really neat little droplets and everything. I feel like it needs sort of some like dust motes floating through the air or something along those lines. And so I added a blank layer. And I remember that I had a brush that made like little speckles, and it was, I don't even remember where I got it, but it is in my collection of brushes. It's actually in my space brushes, and it's the Willa Particles. It's the Willa Particles brush. So I'm going to pick that brush, and I'm going to, let me see, I wrote down which size I use. Oh, I made it really big because right now you can't quite see all the particles. I set the size of this brush to 1370. Oh, there we go. Okay, so they don't look like much, and I want to make sure they're white. I still have this gray shadow color, so I'm going to make sure I have a white. And I'm just going to start adding some little extra sort of specks, particles here to make it look like she's sort of in a magical place. And I think I will probably pull that opacity down just a tad. I don't want them to look too crazy. And then I thought, oh, it's not quite enough. I'm going to add another layer. And I'm going to select, at this point, I have another set of brushes called Firefly brushes. I'm going to select one of those. Firefly brush 20, still on white. And I'm going to make that a little smaller. All right. Now you can see I have a problem. I've painted all over her face with my Firefly brush. So I'm going to add a layer mask here, go back to a more normal brush, make sure it's black. And let's just get those specks off of her. And then I'm really going to pull this opacity because I really want these to just be very subtle. So maybe something about like that. So then to pull all of this sort of together, and I feel like I did a little, overdid these Firefly particles a little bit. Let me go back to my I'm going to do a really low flow here and just kind of remove a few of those. There we go. Okay.
They get on your mask, Jenny.
What's that?
You're not on the mask.
Thank you. Yes, indeed, indeed, indeed. Thank you. Appreciate that. Ha ha. All right. Good enough. Okay, so again, going to take my final step by adding that thing I mentioned before, which is the gradient map. So you select that from down here and you get some options here. You can pick a gradient, and the one I selected was this one right here. And basically what this gradient map does is it creates a layer and it chooses a new color for the pixels of a certain value. So the darkest areas of your gradient, so these areas right here, replace the shadows and the dark things in your image. And then the midtones replace the midtones and the light things replace the light things. And so basically it's sort of pulling your gradient colors together. You usually put this on as a soft light. And in this particular situation, I just put that opacity down to about, I think I had it at about 17. And I forgot, I'm going to turn that off because I forgot another layer I put on first, another adjustment layer. And that was a color balance adjustment layer. And that basically lets you kind of balance out. And I do it sort of just by what it looks like. But let me go back to that one first because can I not find it? Here it is. Oh, yes. So with the color balance adjustment layer, I took my my midtones. Here you can pick either your shadows, your midtones, or your highlights. In the midtones, what I did was I actually pulled this down just a little bit to the left towards cyan as opposed to red. And I took this magenta green slider and I just popped that up a little bit. Actually, I think I just had that to a +1. And then I played with my highlights a little bit and took this down. I think it was just about -8. There we go. So this would be without the color balance, and this is with that added. And then this is adding in the gradient map, which again, sort of just pulls everything and brings it into a similar range of colors. Now, at this point, if I had opened this original mushroom as I did from Lightroom, if I'm on this image right here and I would say file save, it's going to then open that image back up in Lightroom as a TIFF, or it should. Okay, so here it is, we're back over in Lightroom, and now this is a TIFF in Lightroom. And at this point, I could go in and make any sort of Lightroom adjustments. If I wanted to crop it, I could crop it here in Lightroom. I could, you know, choose to do any of my normal Lightroom things and then export it from Lightroom into whatever format, whatever folder, whatever I wanted to do with it. I could also, and probably would also, in Photoshop, save it as a PSD file so that I could go back into it and have all the layers and be able to use it as a PSD. And basically, that is how I do what I do, with a very, very simple composites, and sort of my thought process and why I chose to do what I chose to do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And hey, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, Ginny, you had mentioned you wanted a dreamlike look on the mushroom and the girl. Did you consider a touch, just a slight touch of diffuse glow to make some of the droplets kind of, I don't know, or the light? I don't know if you thought about diffuse glow.
That would be a great idea.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Did not try that.
Ginny, one tip with your shadow layer, use a different blending mode than just.
Oh yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you probably did that, but
yeah, you know what? I tried to recreate what I had done, and I didn't go and check everything on exactly how I had done that.
Yeah, I feel your pain doing it with all these people staring at you.
Yeah, it's very hard. I wasn't sure I really wanted to do that, but I thought it would be helpful for someone who was just trying to see, you know, sort of how I stumble through it and see kind of how it can happen.
Yeah.
Jenny, you can download a bunch of grass brushes that will take care of the grass problem.
You know, I've seen some, and I haven't. I feel like I used some type of brush like that when I did the image of the kids on the frost, because I had the frost coming up behind their feet, and then I just couldn't find those brushes again when I went back to look for them. But thanks, David.
How many people do use Photoshop? Yeah.
Okay.
I can't
Pretty
see
many.
the hands on all the blacked out.
And the blacked out ones, you can't see whether
Yeah.
they use it or not.
They can put their hand up, but I was just curious how many of us cheat.
Used, but very minimally. And I would love to do some of the things Ginny does here.
Yeah.
With a few ideas.
Yeah.
Real helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I hope somebody, you know, that other people are willing to get out and try something. Like I said, there's some really mind-blowing and amazing composites out there, and I'm not there yet, but I'm willing to share with the group, because sometimes seeing how somebody else goes through something is helpful.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people online that they just go out and shoot pieces constantly. If they see, you know, a mud puddle or some great, oil stain or whatever, because they're going to use it in a composite later on.
Right. I feel like one of our previous presenters talked about gathering assets and just sort of keeping those things to be able to be used for some future imagination that you might come up with.
Like backgrounds.
Yeah.
Yep, I often will shoot a, something with rust or some sort of a stone wall, like I said, or whatever, and then
Like
you can go
text-
back and find them.
Like textures.
Yeah.
Yes,
Adobe has
exactly.
Adobe has a mobile app. I can't remember what it's called. It's called Adobe Capture. I can't remember, but it's on your
Sounds
phone.
familiar.
It's on it. You put it on your phone, your tablet, and then you can capture things into your Creative Cloud library, and then they will be available to you in Photoshop or Lightroom or wherever you want to pull it in. But if you're walking around with your phone and you have that on your phone, you can capture your textures, your paintbrushes. You can even capture a quick sketches from real life with that. It's actually a fun app to have on your phone.
Cool.
But
That
what
is
it
the
does,
correct term, Bob. It is capture, creative capture.
yeah, and it's a mobile app. So if you have Photoshop, you have access to that. I think comes with Photoshop or the Creative Cloud.
Mhm.
And I've used that to just grab some stuff, out when I'm out and about on my old iPhone. So it even worked on my old iPhone.
Some of us still have an old iPhone.
Yeah. Well, mine's
So I have
new.
a question of Vince. A couple sessions ago, you did a field that had sparkles in it in much the same way that Ginny had the fireflies in her image tonight. Had you used a preset for that?
No, Julie. Ginny was much more creative than I. That was just straight in camera, a long exposure of thousands of LED lights.
Oh, okay,
It was an art installation. So that
okay.
was a straight shot.
I like, Ginny, how you use the presets to get those effects with the brushes.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, those you can go out and look for lots of, if you have a type of brush you're looking for, look for firefly brushes free, and there are brushes you can download and then you can use them in Photoshop.
Okay.
Or like I said, you can make your own brushes too from things, but sometimes it's easier to get the brushes.
It was brilliant, Ginny.
Yeah.
Oh, come on.
No, it was really superb. It's going to make it hard for people to want to do a presentation. I mean, it was really extremely good.
Well,
Yeah.
it's meant to be fun. That's the whole point, is having fun. And you sit down with these, for me to do it in front of you guys, I feel like, ooh, that was not, I went through and redid that a couple times to try to make sure I could remember everything. But a lot of times you work on something like that over like a period of days or weeks. You keep coming back, you look at it, you walk away, you think, oh, I could add this, I could add that. And if you watch these people online who are real masters of composites, they're just incredible, and they do spend a long time creating them. So this is sort of the baby steps here.
I shared a few artists that are composite masters.
Mhm.
The one guy who really put this into the forefront did it in the darkroom, Jerry Yulesman. He just passed away 2 weeks ago or so. He was amazing, and he did it all in the darkroom. So, but there's some artists there you might want to check out. I know I saw some classes on Creative Live right online if anybody's interested in pursuing this further with doing compositing and Photoshop. And there's tons of YouTube videos on it as well.
Well, if anybody did what Vince suggested and is going to the Photoshop Virtual Summit, one of the people who was on today was Julianne Cost, and she actually did a composite as her presentation today. It was really about layers, and she was talking about all the different ways you could use layers, and I kept thinking, oh, I should have included that in my presentation. It was a little bit late at that point to change anything, but Julianne Cost is a master at Photoshop and Lightroom, and if you are working on or if you've decided to be part of the free Photoshop summit that Vince had in the newsletter. You can still go back for 2 more days and watch her composite thing. It was quite interesting.
Ginny, you talk as fast as she does.
Do I? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay, but she is spectacular. I watched her this
Oh,
morning.
yeah. Yeah, so you saw the one with the rabbit mask and the wings
Just-
and everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Another one is Jim Zuckerman. I just put him in the chat. The link. Jim had spoken to our group about a year ago, and he is phenomenal with his composites and does probably the best Lightroom or Photoshop course that I've seen. 5 sessions, 2 to 3 hours each. He's really amazing.
Yeah, and I know there are other ways to do composites. I think there are probably apps you can use, to do like some kind of compositing on your phone with phone photographs, but I never tried any of those. I just sort of play around in Photoshop and see what I get.
Yeah, there is one on the phone. I forget the name of it offhand right now, but it has layers and everything to do.
Snapseed?
No, it's another
And
one.
there's a lot of them, but
Yeah.
you can use Lightroom Photoshop on your phone too. It's a lighter version. But you can play with Snapseed, and I composite all the time on there now. And there's a lot of different layering. There's a lot of things you can't do, and it's probably not as fast like Photoshop goes, but
The
It's
whole
pretty
secret
neat.
is to have the creative thought process. That's the hard part.
Yeah, coming up with the ideas, that is.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
You may recall, we had John Paul Capenegro speak maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. And he does they're composites, but they're creations. So a lot of his composites aren't real objects. And his creativity, he says, comes from his dreams. You may recall one of his icebergs that looked like it had a bow tie. And that was part of a nightmare he had while on board the ship in Antarctica, so he says. And then he went out and he created it, blending together various objects he photographed and then also digitally created. So the creativity behind what Ginny just showed us is the key part. And that's hard to teach. You need to kind of almost be born with it.
Can I warn
Well-
everyone? Can I warn everyone, Ginny?
About.
That if you start this, you don't sleep. You just go right down, and next thing you know,
Yeah,
the sun's
Down the
coming up.
rabbit hole.
Yep.
That happened to me last night. I started playing in Photoshop, and next thing I know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. So, just be warned. That's all I'm doing. It's an addiction.
One thing I forgot to say, and I should have said this more than once, or should have said it while I was working through my little demonstration, is it's very important to go up and save frequently. Unless now it saves on its own, but I don't think so.
No.
Frequently go up and go ahead and save your work as you go along, because it's nothing worse than having something happen and all those hours and layers of work that you did are all of a sudden just gone, and you have to try to recreate it. So yeah, save frequently, save and name your layers. Those are the key points.
Yeah, one thing Ginny did, and I teach all my students to do, is make a copy of the original like you did of the background, but that does double the size of your file automatically. Every layer is going to make that file a lot bigger.
That's why if you're able to use a blank layer and just add a small amount of an element to the blank layer, you don't add nearly as much to the size of the file.
Yeah,
for sure. It's a good point.
yeah. Thanks, Ginny. Next time when you're performing, we'll just blank all of our faces out so you don't see us. That way
Oh,
we
I
know
couldn't
you're-
see you.
Oh,
I couldn't
okay.
see you while I was presenting.
But we were watching, Ginny.
But we were watching and you knew it.
You know, I really would have liked to have done it with you, with having you sitting in chairs in front of me,
Yeah.
because I could tell if you were really with me or not.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you were starting to stare at the ceiling, I knew I'd have to throw a joke in there or something. And I only know about 2 jokes, so that wouldn't have been very good.
Well, speaking of a joke in the chat room, you should read the chat, Ginny, and maybe.
Oh no, there's jokes in the chat.
Well, there's kind of one joke I'm going to reference, but Jay, you could forward Ginny the chat at the end of this if you would like. But I like Lee's comment. It might have been easier to find a very tiny girl or a very large mushroom. I thought that was great.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Yes, you're probably right.
It was brilliant, Jenny, but I think there's a degree of artistic intelligence that you have that I can't even begin to look for.
Well, it is a different aspect of photography. I mean, you know, everybody here has a certain aspect of photography that they're really good at or they really enjoy. And, you know, a lot of us, we just need to try tasting different things and seeing how they are. You know, some of you are like, Kim's amazing with portraits and Vince does landscapes, and, you know, Betsy did those amazing still lifes. And I mean, it just seems like everybody has something they maybe are drawn to. And this isn't really the only thing. I mean, I've basically showed you all every attempt I've ever made at compositing almost. So as you can see, I'm no expert. But I figured maybe it'd be less scary for somebody else to present if they had a chance to just see somebody, a normal person like me, just showing you how I learn.
Okay, I just rolled my eyes.
What these talks do is that it gives you a thought process. I know after Betsy's talk, whenever I saw either what could be a still life or a photograph or painting of a still life, I thought about multiple different little pieces that she had stated during her talk. And I've been looking at things, still life things, differently since her talk. And certainly now I'll go out and rethink about the developing the war chest of little pieces of stuff. But I don't know if I'll ever be able to composite with that kind of creativity. It just,
Well, I look forward to seeing what you, so look forward to seeing what you come up with. You and Lee can, go ahead.
One of the competitions.
Yes, we can see it in one of the competitions.
My problem is I don't have any cute little grandkids. That's
I know, well, I
it's
only,
just unfair. I don't have built-in models.
You have
like
to
you do.
lend them.
I only have 2, and you know, no one else will model for me. So I just sort of, I try to sneak it in, but sometimes they can tell what my plan is, and they don't always cooperate. I tried to do one of Edith sitting on the mushroom. I had her dressed in her princess dress. I had a butterfly, a picture of a butterfly. I gave her some butterfly wings. That one still hasn't really come together yet, but we'll see.
well, I think hanging her from her mother's arm in midair, that was probably a little too much for her to do that. You know, jumping straight down from the mother.
No, I did let her stand on the bench.
Yeah.
Well, when's the next one, Ginny?
I'm not doing another one for a while. I don't know.
I thought he meant grandchild.
Oh, then, did you mean the next
Well,
grandchild?
Well, both, yeah.
No,
next
I don't have, there's
grandkid.
no other grandchild in the oven at the moment, but, and I
Well,
don't
you
think
did-
I'm having any more children, so.
Well, you know, a lot of photographers rely on family members for free models and no model releases. So
That's right.
you have to talk to your children to make some more.
Well, I was just out in Santa Fe and everything is Georgia O'Keeffe out there. And Stiglitz, the photographer in New York, he used her as his model. He cheated on his wife with her. His wife kicked him out. They got married. and he put a whole portfolio of Georgia O'Keeffe photographs together and became quite famous with that work. And then cheated on her and used a new model. So
A suggestion, Vince, or is that a suggestion?
I'll
How
stick
to
with
get
my
famous.
grandchildren.
Hmm.
I'll stick with the
there's-
grandchildren.
Yeah, I think, wasn't there a Pennsylvania artist in the Wyeth family who had
His
a
wife was a
had a model
photographer.
called Helga or something like that?
Mhm.
Well, thank you, Ginny. This was wonderful.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, guys. I appreciate
Yeah.
the chance to share.
great night.
Yeah, it was really good.
I'm gonna go out and buy some grape jelly, Ginny.
Oh, yes, go get the grape jelly for your Baltimore Orioles and navel oranges. You cut them in half, put them in a little dish, my orange, and you'll get some Orioles maybe. Yep.
So do people bring grape jelly to the Orioles baseball games?
I don't think
Oh, are
so.
you- that's-
I don't think so. I don't know. I don't remember where I learned it, probably on the PA Birders Facebook page, but somebody was talking about grape jelly and they do love it.
You'd think you'd have ants all over it, though.
I don't though. I don't usually get ants on it. I don't know why.
I would have raccoons at night.
Well,
Stuff up.
though I did have one glass dish that ended up, I found it on the floor of the deck in the morning. So I think maybe a raccoon did that one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you
that
have
was
to
a
do
little
some night photography and catch them in the act.
disappointing.
Yeah.
I'd like to just catch them in the have a heart trap is what I'd like to catch them. in.
Oh,
So that reminds me, I'll tell you a little story. We were out with friends this weekend for dinner, and the one loves animals, and a duck came onto their property and decided she was going to build a nest.
mm,
They just, and you, apparently in New Jersey, you can't move a duck nest. Or I don't know, maybe Pennsylvania as well. So the husband bought her, she wanted to watch this thing all the time. So the husband bought her this white freestanding video camera that went to her cell phone so she could watch the duck. So she has this beautiful shot of the duck. The duck had built a nest there, had its eggs that she was sitting on each day. And then the next time she turned on the camera this past week, she couldn't figure out what she was looking for. She went back and reviewed the tape, and the duck thought the white camera was an egg and pushed the white camera into the nest.
Oh,
And this is on the video. And then the duck goes and sits down on the white camera. So it's the duck's butt coming down onto the camera, and she's now sitting on the camera inside the nest. And
oh, that's
they
funny.
don't quite know what to do because there are like 3 other eggs in there.
I guess you have to leave it there and then maybe when the eggs hatch, you'll really get a bird's eye view.
I guess.
That's funny.
Oh, man.
All right. Well,
All
good
right, I
night,
think we're
y'all.
done. It's, it's 9:09. It's time for bed and
Yeah.
No, it's time for Photoshop.
yeah,
Oh, God.
I will challenge you to everybody to give it a try.
Yeah, for those of us that are kind of retired like Bob, you can work till 3 in the morning.
Mhm.
No, I'm not retired.
Just very tired.
I'm
I
not,
get up
I'm
at
just
4:30.
tired.
Very
Yeah,
tired.
I'm just tired. We're gonna stop the recording now.
All right.
Sounds like a good idea.
Yeah, that's good.